with history, what's this called? History 103, HS 103, and with History 360 slash History 219. This is Professor Donald Earl Collins. I'm coming to you today to basically try to share with you some of the stuff around your freestyle group and individual projects that you will be doing for the remainder of the semester. This is your, you have the assignment broken up in two parts basically, but you'll be doing this for the rest of the semester. Part one is this week coming up, which is turning in a 122 page proposal for what you're going to do in terms of your artifact and how you're going to follow through in terms of what you exactly plan on doing with your project. And then the rest of the time, the next month or so after that, actually doing your project. This takes up about 5 weeks of your time. You'll be doing this ideally in group format. You will probably be doing a video recording or some sort of multimedia presentation that will be recorded and available to people online. Some of you might want to do in-class presentations, but we'll go through all of that in a minute. So I'm going to share the screen so that you can actually see what I want, an example of what I'm planning on doing. It won't be for both classes. It'll be, part of, I might toggle between 103 and 360/219, but you'll see it. So let me share the screen with you so that you can see what I am talking about. Let me do that right now. All right. So this is an overview. It's in the syllabus. It's not only is it in this, it's a part of the syllabus, but I've broken this out and you will have this in the next day or so online in your in Moodle for you to download, as well as just having it in your syllabus. So the basis for all of this is pretty simple, right? It's complicated, but it's simple at the same time. You need to find a historical artifact that fits within the time frame of your course. If you're in History 103, that's from roughly 1865 to the present. If you're in History 360 slash 219, that's also from 1865 to the present. Both classes have some leeway. I mean, if you want to start talking about the Emancipation Proclamation versus the 13th Amendment, for instance, as artifacts, you can do so. Technically speaking, you're right on the edge. That's fine. If you suddenly want to talk about, what life was like for slaves in the 18th century, it doesn't fit. If you want to talk about textile factories in Lowell, Massachusetts in the 1830s, it doesn't fit. If you want to talk about immigration to the United States in the late 18th and early 19th century, it doesn't fit. If you want to talk about the War of 1812 or Manifest Destiny, the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, does not fit. It needs to be in the time frame. I mean, I don't want to have to argue about this too much. I had several students last semester who did this, who kept playing around and going, I don't really want to do this, I want to do that. No, I'm not going through all of that. You either find an immediate reason to try to justify bringing something in from before 1865, or you're not doing it, okay? The other thing I don't want are generalities, just as an aside, right? If you just want to look at immigration to the US, no, you got to find an artifact. If you want to look at the Vietnam War, no, you have to talk about an artifact, right? It's got to be around those things. And if you want to do individual projects and you want to write paper, even though that is available, right? And that still says you can write a 4 to 6 page paper. I am strongly discouraging that. Almost to a person, no one did well on the paper. The average grade on the paper was basically a C+/B-, and that's mostly because, like most of y'all aren't strong writers, for one thing. But beyond that is the truth that when you're talking about doing an artifact, that's something that usually people can hear or see or touch, or at least have some, or smell even, or have some sense of, right? Writing the paper about an artifact is not the same as being able to see it. It's not the same as basically having some experience with artifacts, right? And so it's kind of hard to describe an artifact in the paper, especially one where most of the students even provide a picture. I mean, You don't even have a picture of your artifact. So I don't think that that's a great thing to do. I mean, it's the easy thing to do if you just want a grade, if you want to get an A. If you want, I strongly urge you, even if you decide to do the individual route, excuse me, to not just write a paper. The only reason you should be writing a paper is if you don't care about getting a C or a B, right? You don't care about getting a good grade. You don't want to, you're okay with a B minus, you're okay with a C plus. That's the reason to do it. Unless you're a strong writer, that's the only reason to do it. So just throwing that out there, right? But for both US and for African American history post 1865, I want you to stay in the time frame. Ideally, do some sort of multimedia project. And the artifact, this is the key thing. Half of the students who did proposals last semester did talk about their subject matter or their topic and never provided an artifact. An artifact is anything. It's not just a shard of pottery that an archaeologist finds somewhere in some archaeological dig in Pompeii or in Central America, dealing with the Maya or dealing with the Inca in South America and other things, or Angkor Wat out there in Southeast Asia. It is anything that has intrinsic historical value. In this particular case, intrinsic historical value that had an impact in its time or had an impact beyond its time, right? Within the period, right? So you can technically talk about the 13th Amendment and why technically it doesn't work in conjunction, that it works better in conjunction versus talking about the Emancipation Proclamation. For instance, that could be something if doing U.S. or African American history. I do not recommend it. I'm just throwing an idea out there, right? Last semester, I took Rosa Parks off the table because Rosa Parks' bust is at a museum somewhere because it is a historical artifact. And Rosa Parks and the significance of her stance against riding on the back of the bus and Jim Crow segregation, the Montgomery bus boycott, and the ending of segregation and public transportation in the United States. First of Montgomery, Alabama, but basically across the South in the 1950s and 60s, and its significance, I guess, to this day, right? To some extent, even though some people will argue that, the disability laws have been used to basically push Black people in the back of the bus. There are some people who would argue that, right? I mean, that's part of all this too. I'm not saying that that's the case, but um, I don't know. I mean, I haven't studied it. Interesting, someone did, but I'm not. But Rosa Parks is off the table. You can cover someone else in their stance against segregation and public transportation or something like that, but not Rosa Parks. Too well covered. Too many people cover it, and I don't want to see the same thing over and over again. Okay. So you need to be specific. Artifact can be anything, right? You could talk about the first mobile phones and the size of those mobile phones in the 1970s, how those phones have shrunk in time, and the impact of mobile telephone technologies on communication in the United States. The fact that your generation is not very social in terms of their ability to communicate versus, say, Gen Xers or young baby boomers, just to put it as a for instance. I'm just throwing it out there. That's what the research shows. Don't get mad at me about generational differences. That's what the research shows. That would be one example. Another example technologically could be something like, automobiles, radios, television, you know, whatever it is, right? Multimedia in general, right? The rise of multimedia, the rise of mass multimedia in the second half of the 20th century, those kinds of things, right? You can talk about weapons. You can talk about a letter your grandmother wrote to her family in order to get them to migrate. And that would be very, very specific. You want to be specific about that and the hardships that that family, whether they be Italian or Greek or Pole or what, faced in terms of not in terms of wasp racism directed at them and slash the horrors of working in industrial America. Those kinds of things. You could do that. You can do um, you can do other artifacts, the slave narratives that that Federal Riders Project workers took from folks who have born into slavery, but somehow as kids, by the time they were basically teenagers, slavery was over, right? Or in some cases, people who lived through slavery until their 30s and 40s and managed to live till they were 100, and talk about the impact of the slave narratives have on our understanding of slavery, because our understanding of slavery as a country has changed over time. It wasn't always slavery was horrible. There's still this fragment of people out there arguing that slavery was a good thing for Black people, right? But and that used to be the primary argument in my field, in the field of history, until the 1950s and 60s. It took the slave narratives and researchers who were saying, no, we're not doing this top-down history anymore, where we tell everyone else what to think. We actually want to know what ordinary people thought about their own situations. And so they went back to the slave narratives and corrected the narrative in the field, even though there's still people out there trying to argue slavery was good because it took lazy, good for nothing, what's, and made them, gave them civilization kind of bullshit answers, right? So there's that. But that's an example. There are lots of things out there, right? Postcards can be an artifact. A work of art can be an artifact. Music, and I've been playing music for you in a couple of cases, even music videos for you. Movie can be an artifact. Um, See, books can be an artifact. Not the books we've been using in class, mind you. Can't use those. But a book can be an artifact, and I don't mean just a novel. It can be, a book. It can be nonfiction. It could be poetry. It can be whatever. It could be a piece of poetry. It could be lyrics from music. It could be, musical notes. It could be anything. Anything can be an artifact as long as there is a historical story to tell with it within the time frame. So it's pretty wide open as long as you stay within the time frame. It is really wide open. A gas station can be an artifact. An 8-track tape can be an artifact. Um, a historical event that isn't covered in class can be an artifact. I can't cover everything in U.S. history. I can't cover everything African American history. So you can use a moment to be an artifact. You know, anything that has historical significance both within the time frame when it happened and then having the ripple effects beyond that into maybe even into the present. All of that stuff is important. Okay, so now caveat to all of this in terms of talking about artifacts, and I just want to quickly scroll down in terms of more details, right? In terms of doing research, narrative. I gave you certain examples. I talk about Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton, Robert Jones Jr.'s novel The Prophets, Disney series WandaVision, Public Enemies Can't Trust It. That's one example. Those are examples from the U.S. side of things. There's poetry, but there's Audre Lorde. I talk about Ralph Ellison. There are a whole host of things you can do. Now you need to compile this in as creatively in most creative ways you can. To be perfectly honest with you, this isn't just about you. Your level of creativity can be very low level. The creativity can actually be the topic itself, right? You have thought about something in a creative and an analytically creative enough way to make it unique, right? You're not just talking about immigrants, right? I had 6 projects that dealt with immigration last semester. Some of them were so general that they really didn't do it. And some of them were really great. I will give you links to 2 of those. And across all classes, you can see what can be done in terms of levels of creativity. Here's my point with that. Your ceiling, your floor, excuse me, your floor should just be, I'm going to record myself doing a PowerPoint presentation. That is your floor. Recording yourself, through using audio, either embedding audio in the PowerPoint itself, and or doing exactly what I'm doing right now, which is recording myself while talking about, this assignment. That is the floor. That is your basement. The ceiling is really anything that's not offensive, right? Your ceiling is anything that's not offensive. I've got a whole list of things down here, right? I've got listed doing a podcast, which can be audio only or audio visual. Here's what people don't understand. Yes, a lot of podcasts, especially ones that first started out and people started doing podcasts in the late zeros, right? We're just audio only. But podcasts are audio and visual. Some of the best podcasts out there just have two people talking through a microphone and they're being recorded while they're talking about the issues they're talking about. That's still a podcast. Do not do what a group did for me last semester. A group of 4 folks did a podcast where because they didn't know how to just record audio, they took their camera and put it down on the table and made it face the wood grain on the table. All right. And so all you saw was wood grain while they talked for 15 minutes, right? That even if they had had the greatest discussion, whatever topic they were talking about, the fact that they did that ruined the creativity level. That was lazy. Either record yourself visually and audibly, or just record yourself in audio, but figure it out. Don't just show wood grain. Don't do that, right? You can show pictures during a podcast, pictures about this of the stuff you're talking about. You can have a slide of those kinds of things. You can create a web page or a website too. You don't just have to do that, right? You can create you can do spoken word, you can dance, you can rap, you can do gymnastics. You could be talking about sports and shooting hoops and show me how many threes in a row you can nail from NBA range and those kinds of things. You know, do a crossover dribble and beat one of the people in your group to the basket and dunk on their butt. If that's part of your if that's part of your podcast or part of your audiovisual presentation, make it work, right? I want you to be creative and I want you to think a little bit outside the box. It shouldn't just be, I just got to do this assignment and Professor Cos wants us to do all this stuff and I'm already tired from doing this, from doing this writing assignment that, was already onerous and now he wants me to do all this extra stuff around, talent and stuff. Yeah, yeah, I want you to, I mean, the alternative is to give you a final exam, right? The alternative is to give you a final exam where you vomit up a bunch of stuff that, I taught you, of course, this semester, most of which you've already forgotten from what I can tell from from your final drafts of your writing assignments anyway. So, yeah, be more creative, think more outside the box. Think about putting together a slideshow, some sort of visual collage where you explain the collage. Talk about music, go through lyrics, right? Show music videos and why they're doing what they're doing in videos. Create a Spotify list of music that from a certain era and why this music is important. Don't just give me the list. Explain in detail through presenting it why this stuff is important. A Wikipedia page. You could do a virtual tour of different things. If you want to show us, a tour of I don't know, a building or something like that. Maybe it's a speakeasy. One of your samples that I'll put up today will be about a speakeasy. So you need to do those kinds of things, right? You know, if it, some of you, a lot of you live in the area. So you could use the area, things that are in the area as part of your artifact, right? It could be a rusting, dilapidated, abandoned, factory in Baltimore, somewhere in West Baltimore, somewhere, or out or on the outskirts of Baltimore County or something. It could be, you know, it could be someone's house and this person has a lot of importance, that kind of thing. It could be a lot of different things, right? If you're from the DMV, same thing, right? Because DMV ain't that far away, and some of you are in fact from Montgomery County or PG County or Anne Arundel County and then around Washington, D.C. So there's that too. So there's a lot you can do. Do not limit yourself in terms of creativity. Do not limit yourself in terms of how you present your material. And then when you're done, you will be loading up this material to a third party because you can't load this stuff up on Google. People keep trying, and I keep telling them stop loading the video, audio stuff on here. I can't download it all and store it all. What you need to do is to actually put it on YouTube, put it on Vimeo, put it on Instagram, put it on whatever software package makes sense that isn't costing you money to do, so that you can just give me the link. I give the link to everyone else in your class or classes so that they can comment on it. That's what the last week of the class is, commenting on it, right? I say at the end of this, and this is where, only a few of you, given the time constraints, maybe a 4 to 6 group of individuals who want to do in-class presentation will be able to do so. So first come, first serve. If there are you who definitely want to show off, those extroverts among you who want to show off and present in class, please do so. Right? Please let me know sooner rather than later, not at the last minute. I am not, if I come in the class on April 25th and I have 3 people who are presenting, you can't be number 4. Too late then. If it's April 27th and there are 3 people presenting in your class, can't be number 4 there either, right? And it's first come, first serve. So, like I said, I have a whole list of things in both documents for both classes. Your dates for your due dates are the same. March 19th for your proposal, April the 23rd for your actual presentation, and going through all of that. So there's that. I'm sure there'll be more questions as we go through this week. I wanted to have this for you for this purpose, just so that you don't have to ask as many questions. But here's the other thing. Here's the other important thing to know. Do not do anything offensive, right? And I know that's a hard sell for some of you because you like offending people, because you want to be contrarian and you want to be special and you want to be an individual and all this other stuff. Well, it's one thing for me to see your occasional offensive language and offensive use of terms and so on and so forth. I will excuse it because I'm your professor. And even though it might be a little traumatizing for me here and there to see something racially or sexually or offensive and whatnot, okay, I'm 53. I probably have heard or seen this stuff 100,000 times by now. But, keep in mind your audience, right? Don't ask questions that are offensive in order to just dispute them. Right? That's what one group did last semester. They asked a whole bunch of offensive questions, made a whole bunch of offensive assumptions, tried to laugh it off and go, well, some of these assumptions are wrong, and blah, blah, blah. Don't spitball your way through a presentation. All right. Do something more creative and do something that's less offensive. Don't try to offend people. You don't need to answer questions that have already been answered. We already know that not everyone thinks that a lot of people think that everybody who's ever been Black has been poor. All right. That there are no exceptions to that rule. That Jim Crow South somehow existed all over the United States. Other things that people just got plain wrong on their papers, right? Those kinds of things. We already know those things, right? That those things are wrong, that their assumptions are wrong, that they're stereotyping, that they're overgeneralizing, that they might even be exhibiting implicitly or explicitly their racism, sexism, and other isms as well. Here's an opportunity to do something that doesn't do that, right? You can talk about these sort of issues without offending people. You really can. If people get offended, it's because they don't want to hear about it, not because you've actually offended them. There is a difference. So be careful with your language, just like I've been explaining all along in your writing assignments. Do the same thing with this. Take care with this, right? These are presentations that you're putting up for public consumption, for the consumption of your other students in your class, for them to comment on, and for me. So, be careful with your language. Be careful on how you're being contrarian. Be careful on those kinds of things, right? If you give me a project that I think is offensive, I'm going to tell you to change your project. And if you decide in midstream to change your project and do something offensive, you will get a lower grade, right? Substantially lower grade. So be careful with that. Um, Trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention. I'll be putting up samples in the next day or two, either today or tomorrow, sample proposals for you to look at. These are the best of the best proposals that even with me saying you need to do certain things that generally speaking follow the format that they're supposed to follow. They're 1 to 2 pages long. They cover all the elements of what you're supposed to do in terms of a 1 paragraph summary, an outline of the content you plan to include, a timeline for completing the project, description of what attributes complete a project you have in order for you to earn an A, right? And don't just do wrote, I have to write a well-written paper, all right? What do you really need? What do you think you really need to do? Right? People did it, there are a lot of different things. I had 2 students last semester who did a group project where they play acted their way through a scene in the movie that they covered in their project and talking about a larger issue. They play acted for 5 minutes. One of them is a really good actor, the other one sucks. But yet they did that for 5 minutes. And even if they had both sucked, it would still have gotten an A simply because of the fact they were willing to be creative, they were willing to be daring, and they used historical context all along the way explaining what they were doing. It was really good. It was very well put together overall. Right? These are the kinds of things that you could be doing if you think outside the box and you're more creative. And you have a month. You can pick your own group. That's the last thing I want to leave you with. You are picking your own group. I am not picking anybody for you. You pick who you work with, right? Do not pick, if you don't think you can work with somebody because they're consistently lazy and they do everything at the last minute, then maybe you should have them in your group, okay? So don't get mad at me when your group doesn't work out, right? I'm sorry for some of you where your partner didn't work well with you on your writing assignment. That's not this assignment. This is one where you get to pick, you get to choose, you get to work with or not. Okay. So that's all I really wanted to talk about regarding everything in terms of this freestyle artifact assignment. I hope that it works out. Obviously, you can ask me questions this week about it, but you have proposals due at the end of the week, and hopefully you can get them done.